You think trees grow from the ground, roots below, trunk above, soil feeds the wood, earth becomes tree. That's the picture in your head. You imagine the mass of a tree rising out of the dirt, pulled upward, shaped by the ground that holds it. You see soil disappearing, you see wood appearing, cause and effect, obvious. But that picture is wrong. The ground is not where a tree comes from. Not really, not in the way you think. Most of what you call a tree was never in the soil. Not the trunk, not the branches, not the towering weight of it. So where did it come from? If you take your intuition seriously, if you follow it carefully, it collapses. The tree is not built from the earth beneath it. The source is stranger, less visible, almost impossible to trust. You are looking at trees every day and misunderstanding what they are. You see a tree standing in the ground and the story writes itself. The earth feeds the roots build the trunk becomes wood. It feels complete, closed, obvious. A tree is made of dirt. This belief doesn't come from science. It comes from sight. You look at a tree and see where it stands. You see the ground holding it, surrounding it, touching every root. You see the soil as the only visible supplier of substance. The conclusion feels unavoidable. The tree must be pulling its body from the earth. After all, what else is there? Rain falls, yes. Sunlight shines, yes. Air surrounds it. But these feel secondary, supportive, not structural. Water seems too thin. Light seems too intangible. Air seems like nothing at all. None of them look capable of becoming heavy wood. So your mind assigns the job of building the tree to the only thing that looks solid enough, the soil. But notice what just happened. You decided where matter comes from based on what looks substantial to you. You trusted appearance. You trusted weight, density, visibility. You assumed that because wood is solid, its source must also be solid. Because the tree is heavy, its origin must be heavy. Because the trunk feels real in your hands, its substance must come from something equally real beneath your feet. This is not reasoning. This is instinct, and instinct is often wrong. Consider how complete this illusion feels. When you imagine a growing tree, you picture the ground slowly emptying itself into the trunk. You imagine the soil being consumed, transformed upward into bark and branch. The earth below becomes the structure above. You rarely question this image because it matches a simple rule you carry about the world. Solid things come from solid things. But this rule has never actually been tested in your mind. It has only been assumed. Look more closely at what you believe the soil provides. A full-grown tree weighs tons. Its trunk is dense, rigid, massive. If all of that came from the ground, the earth around the tree should be steadily disappearing, converted kilogram by kilogram into wood. You expect the ground to be the tree's reservoir of substance, yet when you walk through a forest, the soil does not appear to be vanishing. The earth does not sink dramatically around ancient trees. The ground does not show obvious signs of being consumed in proportion to the enormous mass rising above it. Still, the intuition survives, because the visual story is so persuasive. Roots below, tree above, source and product, cause and effect. But this story hides an assumption so deep you rarely notice it, that the place something stands must also be the place it comes from. A house stands on the ground, but it is not made of the ground. A person stands on the earth, but their body is not built from soil beneath their feet. Yet with trees, you accept the connection without question. You see contact and assume origin. You see support and assume source. And this quiet assumption shapes your entire picture of growth, matter, and life itself. But if the ground is not turning into the tree, if the soil is not the primary source of its substance, then something deeply uncomfortable follows. The tree's mass must be coming from somewhere else, from somewhere far less obvious, from somewhere you barely consider real. Let's take your picture seriously. Assume the tree is made from the soil. Assume the ground is its raw material, its reservoir of substance. The roots draw in earth, convert it, and slowly build the massive structure above. Now follow this idea to its physical consequences. A mature tree can weigh several tons. Its trunk alone may contain thousands of kilograms of solid matter. If all of that mass comes from the ground, then the soil around the tree must be losing thousands of kilograms of material over the tree's lifetime. Where did all that dirt go? This is not a philosophical question. It is a measurable one. If you filled a large container with dry soil, planted a small tree, and allowed it to grow for years, you would expect the soil level to drop dramatically as the tree gained mass. The earth should visibly diminish, converted into wood, bark, and leaves. But when experiments like this are actually performed, something strange happens. The tree grows heavier and heavier. The soil barely changes. The expected loss of earth simply does not occur. The numbers don't cooperate with the story. This creates what we might call the disappearing dirt problem. If the tree's substance comes from the ground, then the ground should steadily vanish in proportion to the tree's growth. Yet careful measurement shows that the soil remains almost the same. The intuition fails when confronted with accounting, and physics is, at its heart, accounting. Matter must come from somewhere. Mass cannot appear from nowhere. If the tree gains weight, something else must lose it. So we look again. Perhaps the soil is only part of the story. Perhaps water provides the missing mass. Trees absorb enormous amounts of water through their roots. Water flows upward, filling cells, maintaining structure, enabling growth. But this explanation also collapses under scrutiny. Water moves through the tree. It enters and leaves. It evaporates from leaves into the air. A tree does not permanently store most of the water it absorbs. The great bulk of a tree's mass is not liquid water, but solid carbon-rich material, wood that remains even after drying. Water participates, but it does not account for the structure, so the accounting problem remains. If not soil and not water, then where does the growing mass originate? Where does the increasing weight come from? What physical source is being converted into the solid architecture of the tree? You might look around for alternatives. Sunlight shines constantly on the tree, but light does not feel like matter. It has no weight in your hands. It leaves no residue. It seems absurd to imagine solid wood condensed from illumination. And then there is the air. It surrounds the tree at all times, invisible, thin, seemingly empty. You walk through it without resistance. You breathe it without noticing its substance. It feels like absence, not presence. Certainly not the source of tons of solid wood, so you dismiss it. Yet the puzzle forces a difficult realization. The visible candidates, soil and water, cannot account for the tree's mass. The obvious sources fail. The accounting does not close. And when every intuitive explanation collapses, you are left with a disturbing possibility. The source of the tree's substance may be something you have been treating as nothing. You treat air as emptiness. You move through it without noticing resistance. You wave your hand through it. Nothing remains. You cannot see it, hold it, or pile it into a heap. So in your mental hierarchy of reality, air ranks near the bottom. Background, not substance. Presence without weight. Environment without material. But this is wrong. Air is matter. It has mass. It has structure. It is made of particles. Countless moving molecules pressing against everything around you at every moment. You are immersed in it the way a fish is immersed in water. You simply stop noticing. The idea that a tree is built mostly from air sounds absurd only because your intuition has been trained to ignore the physical reality of gases. But gases are not nothing. They are simply matter spread out. Matter that hides its presence by being everywhere. This shift in perspective was once deeply unsettling, even to scientists. One of the most disarming ways to understand it was described by Richard Feynman, who invited people to imagine the true source of a tree's substance not in the ground, but in the atmosphere itself. The bulk of a tree's mass comes from carbon dioxide in the air, not from soil, from air. Carbon dioxide is a gas composed of carbon and oxygen atoms drifting through the atmosphere. Each molecule is small, invisible, easy to ignore, but collectively, these molecules contain enormous quantities of matter. A tree does something extraordinary. It captures these wandering molecules from the air and rearranges them into solid structure. What you see as a trunk, dense, rigid, heavy, is largely carbon that once floated freely in the atmosphere. The branches are shaped air. The wood is reorganized gas. This claim feels almost impossible to accept because it contradicts your intuition about substance. You expect the source of a solid object to be visibly solid. You expect weight to emerge from weight, density from density. But here, solidity emerges from dispersion. To see how deeply this challenges intuition, consider a simple thought experiment. Imagine compressing the air in a room until it becomes a visible block of matter, heavy, dark, solid. The air already contains the necessary mass. It is simply distributed too widely for you to notice. A tree performs a version of this transformation continuously, but with extraordinary precision. It does not merely compress air. It extracts specific atoms, carbon atoms, and locks them into stable structures that form wood, bark, and fiber. The mass was always there. It was simply hidden in the atmosphere. This forces a radical change in how you think about the world. The environment you perceive as empty is actually a vast reservoir of material. The invisible becomes the primary source of the visible, and the ground, which seems so obviously responsible, turns out to play a different role. The soil provides support, minerals, and stability, important functions, but not the main supply of substance. The tree is not primarily built from what it stands in. It is built from what surrounds it. The consequences of this realization extend beyond trees. It undermines a basic assumption about reality itself, that what is visible is what matters, and what is invisible is secondary. But here, the invisible is the source. The invisible becomes solid, and the world begins to feel less intuitive than it once did. Now consider the strangeness of the process itself. The tree has captured carbon atoms from the air, tiny, weightless, drifting particles. You might expect that assembling them into a solid trunk would require some sort of magical transformation, but no magic is involved, only sunlight, water, and chemistry, though chemistry in this context is more about patterns than formulas. Here's the core point. Solid wood emerges not from solid matter, but from rearranging the invisible. The tree takes dispersed carbon molecules, mostly from carbon dioxide, and locks them into rigid structures. Cellulose, lignin, the fibrous scaffolding of a trunk, all of this is organized air, crystallized sunlight, and captured carbon. Imagine standing in a room filled with smoke. Every wispy particle seems insubstantial. Now imagine slowly weaving those particles into a dense, immovable sculpture. That is what a tree does with the air around it. The weight, the solidity, the seemingly immovable trunk. It was never in the ground. It was always in the atmosphere, waiting to be structured. Your intuition rebels at this point because it demands that solidity be born of solidity. The mind clings to the comforting narrative, solid tree, solid soil, but reality ignores comfort. The visible form, the substance you can touch and weigh, emerges from what you cannot see. Even water, which the roots absorb and the leaves release, is more like a facilitator than a contributor to mass. Its molecules flow through the tree, enabling reactions and maintaining turgor pressure, but the actual weight of the trunk is almost entirely carbon from the air. Sunlight provides the energy, the spark, to organize these atoms into matter. Without sunlight, the carbon atoms would remain drifting, unstructured, ineffective. Think about that. The solid, immovable tree. The object that seems inseparable from the earth is actually composed of what was once free, invisible, and weightless. Mass is captured, not created from the ground beneath. Growth is an act of transformation, a continual weaving of invisible threads into matter that endures. Now pause and let the strangeness settle. Every tree you have touched, every branch you have leaned on, every leaf you have admired, it is a monument to the air. You believed it arose from the soil, from the tangible support beneath your feet. But the ground is just a stage. The true material, the real substance, comes from a source you never considered substantial, the atmosphere itself. Your intuition wants to cling to solidity as the origin of solidity. But nature violates that expectation constantly. The tree is a lesson in how the world can assemble the substantial from what seems insubstantial. And once you accept this, the tree ceases to be merely a plant. It becomes a living sculpture, an extraordinary reconfiguration of the invisible into the tangible. Now take a step back. Let go of the idea that trees are rooted in dirt. That image is comforting but misleading. What if you saw a tree differently, not as a solid object anchored to the ground, but as a frozen snapshot of the air itself? The bulk of the tree, the trunk, the branches, even the leaves, is made of carbon that once drifted invisibly in the atmosphere. In a very real sense, the tree is air that has been captured, compressed, and solidified, Every ton of wood is a ton of formerly invisible molecules locked into place. The soil supports this transformation but does not supply it. The mass is borrowed from the sky. Consider this. When the wind rustles through the leaves, it moves not just air around the tree, but air that could become more tree in time. The boundary between the tree and the atmosphere is porous, dynamic. The tree is an interface, a structure suspended in and constantly interacting with the surrounding gas. It is both separate and inseparable from the air. Even sunlight plays its part. Energy from photons rearranges molecules, reorganizes bonds, and drives carbon into solid form. The sunlight is captured and embedded, becoming part of the tree's living architecture. In this sense, the tree is a recording of sunlight and atmosphere, a structure grown from processes, not from the dirt below. Try to picture it fully. A towering oak, its mass once scattered invisibly in the sky, its branches stretching upward, yet made from what floats all around. The solidity, the weight, the very thing that seems anchored to the soil is, in truth, a crystallization of the unseen. The ground merely bears the tree, giving it stability, but the real architecture comes from what we never think of as matter. This is why thinking of trees as growing from the ground misleads. They are not consuming the earth. They are capturing the sky. You are standing before a monument made of air, energy, and invisible potential, frozen into form. And this reframing forces a subtle but profound shift in perspective. The tree is no longer a simple object in the environment. It is a process made tangible. Growth is not accumulation from below, but transformation from around. What appears static is a snapshot of ongoing chemical choreography, a frozen record of interaction between invisible elements and light. By the time you begin to grasp this, the world feels lighter and denser at the same time. The familiar solidity of objects dissolves into a network of interactions, processes, and invisible sources. What you see as a trunk is really a lattice of what was once everywhere, now concentrated, given form, and enduring through structure. You think growth is simple. You picture something small becoming bigger, absorbing matter directly from the ground or surroundings. You imagine a cause and effect story. The tree takes dirt, water, sunlight, and the mass simply accumulates. But that picture is wrong. A tree does not grow by accumulation in the way you imagine. Its growth is a process of transformation, not mere addition. Carbon atoms drift through the air. Water flows through roots and leaves. Sunlight delivers energy. And the tree rearranges these raw materials into structure. The growth is invisible before it becomes visible. The solid trunk, the fibrous branches, the leafy canopy, these are not simple deposits from the soil. They are a reorganization of what was already present in its environment. Think of it this way. The tree is not a consumer of matter in the conventional sense. It is a sculptor of molecules, a pattern maker that shapes diffuse, invisible elements into tangible forms. Growth is the act of arranging air, sunlight, and water into order. The tree's increase in mass does not reflect accumulation from a single source, but transformation across the interface of soil, air, and light. Your intuition balks at this because it conflates visible change with visible source. We expect that for something to grow, it must come from somewhere obvious. But most of the substance of a tree comes from somewhere you barely notice, the atmosphere. Consider what this implies. Growth is not just about adding matter. Growth is about harnessing processes, capturing energy, orchestrating molecules, and converting the intangible into tangible. The tree is not passive. It is an active participant in the creation of its own mass, a continuous reconfiguration of invisible resources into a coherent, solid structure. Even death does not break this rule. When a tree falls and decays, the carbon returns to the air. What once appeared solid dissolves back into the invisible. Growth and decay are part of the same flow. Matter is never created or destroyed, only transformed. Understanding growth this way removes the comforting notion of an origin beneath the feet. Growth is not a simple intake from the ground. It is a choreography with the environment, a dance of transformation where the invisible becomes visible, where the intangible becomes structure, where life itself is the process that turns air into wood. The more you grasp this, the more unstable your previous intuitions become. Growth is no longer a simple accumulation. It is a continuous act of transmutation, demanding that you reconsider what it means for something to come from anywhere at all. Now let the full picture settle. The tree is not a product of the soil. It is not a monument built from the ground beneath it. The mass, the solidity, the visible structure, almost all of it, comes from what you never see. The air, suffused with carbon, energized by sunlight, rearranged by life itself. The soil, the ground you once thought so essential, is little more than a stage. It supports, it stabilizes, it anchors, but it is not the origin. The origin is the invisible, the overlooked, the ephemeral. This realization does more than shift your understanding of trees. It dissolves the boundaries you take for granted between object and environment, between substance and process, between presence and absence. What seems solid is always the crystallization of what seems intangible. What seems local is the manifestation of a vast distributed system. The tree's mass was never in the ground because the ground is never where matter originates. Matter flows, transforms, migrates. Life captures it, organizes it, and we perceive it as fixed. Stand beneath a tree and look up. What do you see? Trunk, branches, leaves, a heavy-rooted object. But now imagine those atoms drifting invisibly in the air moments ago, awaiting the spark of life and sunlight to take form. What feels permanent is transient. What feels separate is interconnected. What feels solid is frozen process. In this light, the tree is no longer just a plant. It is a living record of transformation, a sculpture of the invisible, a monument to the atmosphere. Growth is no longer simply more of something, but the continuous shaping of reality itself. The boundary between the tree and its environment collapses. Earth, air, and light converge in a structure that makes you question every assumption about substance, origin, and place. You realize finally that the ground beneath your feet was never the source of anything. It was merely the anchor, the theater, the context. The tree's essence, its true matter, its very mass, was always elsewhere, above, around, and invisible. And in that realization, a strange awe arises. The world is lighter and denser at once. Reality is not what it appears. Matter, life, and growth are ongoing acts of transformation. The solidity you trusted, the origins you assumed, the boundaries you relied on, all of it dissolves into a universe far stranger, more subtle, more beautiful than your intuition ever allowed. The tree is air made tangible, and perhaps in that you glimpse the truth of everything, that what seems solid, permanent, and local is only the frozen moment of invisible processes playing out endlessly around you. The ground was never the point. It never was. It never will be.